once again to the tender romantic strains of Erskine Hawkins and his orchestra playing Bear Mash Blues. We welcome you to another episode of the Charles Freedman radio program. It's a lovely Friday. You made it through another week. Give yourself a pat on the back, a congratulations. Pour that second cup of coffee and settle in for some news talk. We'll be here till noon. Reach the program by dialing 831-265-5050. 831-265-5050. I've got the call screen up, and so if you take the jump, I'll grab your call right away. Now, before we do anything else, I learned something Wednesday when I went out to the fair and did a show with Marco Romanini, and one of the things I learned from him, he's on the tech end of this. He knows about how our program is disseminated worldwide. We're on the World Wide Web, so you can pick up this program anywhere except Russia. I found out that my show is banned in Russia because of this. That's right. From what Marco told me, my theme song, this music, is upsetting to the Ruskies. And I remember thinking about it. Well, why? Maybe they just don't like good jazz. That's possible. It can't be an objectionable lyric or some words they don't like, because my theme song has no lyric. It's an instrumental. There's no words to be upset by, so it has to be something in the music itself. I came up with the idea, Bear Mash Blues. Well, of course, there's the Russian bear. Perhaps they believe that this song is advocating that violence be done, or somehow the Russian bear be squashed. No, not really. I don't think so anyway. I don't know. Reminds me of a time, years ago. I was living on the west side of Santa Cruz. I had this old shortwave radio. And I used to tune in Radio Havana every once in a while, just for laughs. And this one morning, I remember I was shaving, and I was listening to Radio Havana, and they were rebroadcasting the All-Soviet Union Jazz Festival from Leningrad. I kid you not. And there was some band of, Soviet Russian musicians, and they were playing Sugarfoot Stomp. And when they got to the place in the arrangement where somebody's supposed to yell, "Oh, play that thing," the entire band yells, "Oh, play that thing," in this heavy Russian accent. And I laughed so hard I almost cut myself. But at that time anyway, the Soviet government, they had Benny Goodman tour Russia. They actually had somewhat of an affinity for jazz. It seems to me more and more that the Putin regime in Russia is, if anything, worse than the Soviet ever was. I don't know, it just seems to me that this guy is a bigger son of a bitch certainly than Gorbachev. Probably than after all, Brezhnev ran things for 20 years. He never invaded, conquered, and occupied another country. Well, wait a minute. I almost forgot. The Soviets did invade Afghanistan in 1979. I remember President Carter was very upset about that at the time. He said, "I'm amazed. The Soviet Union actually invading another country like that." I'm up to that time, he'd been saying, "We have this inordinate fear of the communists, etc." That was kind of the 2x4 between the eyes for Mr. Carter. And his administration changed its direction after that. It was after that he went along with the idea of stationing intermediate range missiles in Europe to counter the Soviet SS-20s. Yeah, his eyes were opened. But it took that to do it. I mean, all the other things that the Soviets had done up until that time, he was just kind of shrugging his shoulders. Maybe he was the kind of guy who it had to be up close and personal for him. There are people who were like that. That was why Ronald Reagan was so slow to react to the AIDS crisis. it didn't really come alive to him until Rock Hudson got AIDS. Because, of course, Reagan was from Hollywood. Rock Hudson was somebody he knew, somebody that he associated with, worked with, partied with, enjoyed. And suddenly this vibrant, vital man is a dried up husk because of AIDS. From that point on, Reagan was far more responsive in his attitude towards the AIDS crisis. Sidebar. We got to get on to more important things. They caught the son of a bitch, or at least we think he's the son of a bitch. The guy's name is Robinson, Tyler Robinson, and I don't know if you have this news yet. I think it's fairly new, so let's just talk to me. But let me see, what is it, 12 minutes past 9, so it was maybe half an hour ago, a little more, that I was getting ready to come out here, and she said, "Oh, Charles, they caught him." Well, at this point, he's still a prime suspect, but it looks like they're pretty sure they've got the right guy. Now, Tyler Robinson is 22 years old. The suspect was involved in taking him into custody. A high-powered rifle was recovered in a wooded area where the suspected shooter fled. Bullet casings with inscriptions were found. The suspect discussed his dislike for Charlie Kirk in the days leading to the shooting. His family said he'd grown more political in recent years. Trump said he wants the perpetrator to get the death penalty. Well, this is one thing. Another thing where Mr. Trump and I share the same ideas. But, there's something I'd like to say about that. The president now is calling for the death penalty for this guy. Where has he been all along? I mean, Charlie Kirk was an exceptional individual. I understand that. And so Tyler Robinson, if he's the guy, he shot this exceptional individual. But bottom line, Charlie Kirk was what? A human being. He took the life of another human being. What if some miscreant in Chicago who shoots another one, Labor Day weekend, there were 9 people shot and killed? 52 people shot, 9 killed. So what if you're one of the people in Chicago who burned down some innocent citizen? Should you get the death penalty for that? Well, again, you have to take into account the circumstances. The murder of Charlie Kirk was obviously a premeditated, carefully planned, cold-blooded assassination. Now, there's a big difference between that and shooting off a gun in a drive-by incident and having a bystander hit. That's more like what? Manslaughter? Something of that nature. Just the same, you'd like to see somebody with that kind of a callous disregard for human life pay the ultimate price. Always been very much in favor of the death penalty. If you're expecting somebody to speak out against capital punishment, go listen to another program. I believe in capital punishment, very much in favor of it. The one thing I want to make sure is no innocent person. I mean, this isn't like the movies. In the movies, only innocent people are executed. That's the rule. That's the law. If somebody is hanged or goes to the electric chair, oh, he's innocent. And later in the movie, it turns out, yes, he was innocent. And a horrible miscarriage of justice has been conducted. And that's what capital punishment is all about, is killing innocent people. Talk about a false narrative. Unbelievable. No, capital punishment should be reserved for those few whose conduct merits it. It's a merit thing. No DEI for capital punishment. Merit only. Okay, back to Mr. Robinson here. 31 years old. Pardon me. That's about Charlie Kirk. So there is not a great deal yet about this guy. He was taken into custody. He attended Utah State University for 1 semester in 2021. View more. Well, let's see what else they have about this guy. Okay. Law enforcement officials confirmed the suspect's father was involved in taking him into custody in Washington County, Utah, where he lived. Cox thanked Robinson's father for doing the right thing. Mr. Cox, is governor of Utah. Robinson, in the past, was a nonpartisan voter. Parents are registered Republicans. Investigators believe Robinson was active on messaging platform Discord, where he allegedly posted about engraving bullets and needing to retrieve a rifle from a drop point. He's been booked into Utah County Jail. Well, obviously, American jurisprudence, our legal process now, will take over. This gentleman will be given a fair trial. And if he is the perpetrator, he'll be found guilty. And at that point, Utah, in all the states that had capital punishment or have it, there's various methods. In some states, there's the electric chair. Florida has Old Sparky. There's an electric chair at Sing Sing in Ossining, New York. Here in California, we had the gas chamber. The other day I mentioned the greenhouse. Well, the gas chamber up at what's the name of that town? San Quentin. San Quentin is painted green, so it's colloquially known as the greenhouse. Utah had an interesting approach. In Utah, the condemned prisoner was given his choice of either being hanged or facing a firing squad. Now, frankly, these, electric chairs and gas chambers and lethal injections, which there have been all kinds of problems with, all of these rather exotic methods of inflicting capital punishment or carrying out executions seem to me so much, weirdness, just plain weirdness. Hanging is good. A firing squad is good. Quick, simple, effective. Not interested in making a spectacle out of this. We're not, looking to have some kind of viewable moment for people to obsess over. No, just ace the guy and get him out of our hair. Let me see here. Well, the less said about Tyler Robinson, the better. As I said, we still don't know for sure that he's the guilty party. He hasn't been tried yet. It looks like he is. But he doesn't deserve that much attention. He's a vile individual. If he is the perpetrator, he's horrid. It's just like the guy many years ago. Who was it? Wild Bill Hickok? Yeah, he got drawn into a poker game, and somebody, normally he sat with his back to the wall to keep an eye on the room. But this one time, for one reason or another, that he wasn't seated that way. He was, in a vulnerable position. Some guy walked in and said, "Hey, that's that Wild Bill Hickok over there. If I shoot him, I'll be famous." So he did. And I am proud to say I don't remember the guy's name. You wanted to be famous, and buddy, you ain't. You lose. So, Tyler Robinson, you lose. Let's talk a little more about Charlie Kirk, because he was the exceptional individual. He was the person that it's amazing the amount of impact that his assassination is having. Today is Friday, and Kimberly Strassel, as usual, has her column in the Wall Street Journal today. She offers a wonderfully worded analysis of just exactly what Charlie Kirk meant, who he was, why he was so important. The sickest aspect of Wednesday's assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk is that everything he always warned about, the very thing that motivated his many debates and catapulted him to fame. He talked so as to end political violence. This, I might add, this flies directly in the face of those, and there have been a bunch of them. They are claiming, oh, Charlie Kirk was, he preached divisiveness and violence and hatred and et cetera, et cetera. No, he did not. No, he did not. Oh, hey, before I get started on this, here's an example I tracked down today. If you go to Real Clear Politics and you look at the posts that are listed today, you'll find one over on the left-hand side. React. Stephen King faces backlash. Possible lawsuit over comments about King's assassination. Well, we all know that Stephen King is an author of horror novels. Okay, fine. We know that Stephen King is a left-wing thinker in terms of politics. Okay, fine. He has that right. But what else did he come up with in this instance? What's his... Oh, for God's sake. My computer just locked up. I wonder if I'll have to... Okay, we got rid of that. I'm going to try to get that back again because I really would like to share it with you. What was it that Stephen King said that's just so awful? Okay. I found it. King first made headlines immediately after the Kirk shooting, but, oh no, here we are again. Well, evidently this is something that I can't look at because there's weirdness going on with it. But I do remember what it says here. According to Stephen King, Charlie Kirk advocated, the stoning to death of homosexuals. Kirk, or rather King, on one of his posts here, saying, Kirk advocated the stoning of gays. Just saying. Anybody comes up with that just saying, well, that's another issue entirely. But the point here is, when I read that, I thought to myself immediately, no, he didn't. Charlie Kirk would never say a thing like that. Charlie Kirk was a very live and let live kind of guy. The idea of advocating the stoning to death of homosexuals wouldn't occur to him. And a little later on in the piece, it became, the explanation came out. Kirk was, he often talks about and cites biblical quotations for the purpose of examining, etc. He was quoting, there's language in the Bible that homosexuals should be stoned to death. Kirk was not advocating that. He was citing that as, in the course of, yes, an intellectual presentation, a conversation he was carrying on at the time. That was his business. That was what Kirk was about. Conversations. Debates. Exchanges of ideas. That's what Charlie Kirk was about. And I got to thinking, Stephen King evidently is convinced that Kirk advocated this. He's wrong. Stephen King is wrong. Where did he get the idea? Probably by watching MSNBC or CNN or reading the New York Times or some other agendized source that would eagerly take Kirk's comments, words out of context to make it seem as if he had advocated this in order to smear Kirk, in order to make him seem like an intolerant person, which he is not, which he was not. So King was duped. And he repeated this nonsense, and now he may be in trouble for it. After all, once you say something, you're responsible for it. But then I got to thinking, what about the assassin? What did the assassin believe about Charlie Kirk? Is it possible, and this is something that I'll be watching to see if it comes out, is it possible that Charlie Kirk was shot to death for something he didn't say? How about that, huh? Is it possible that the assassin was convinced that Kirk had said A, B, C, D, or E, just like Stephen King was convinced that Charlie Kirk had advocated the stoning to death of gay people? No, he had not. But King thought he had, and for that reason was, shall we say, rather sanguine about the assassination. So what do we learn here? Wouldn't it be absolutely just amazing irony, I mean, just terrific, if it turns out that the assassin of Charlie Kirk was motivated by some bogus nonsense that he got in some agendized presentation that set up a false Charlie Kirk. Something to think about, I believe. So having delivered myself of that, before we get to Kimberly Strassel and her really exceptional take on Kirk's value and just who he was, it is half past or almost half past. So let us indulge in some commercial promotion, and we'll go ahead and do that and be back for more. Okay, there we go.
It's high time to celebrate the opening of the new Hook Outlet Dispensary, 1129 Mission in Santa Cruz. Get in on the opening fun and really low prices on the Hook's unmatched selection of top-quality medical and recreational cannabis flower, vapes, drinks, gummies, and concentrates. The Hook Outlet is now the West Side's source for finest cannabis at the lowest prices. Get in on all the opening fun and low prices at the all-new Hook Outlet. HookOutlet.com for details and deals.
The Santa Cruz County Fair.
Our Santa Cruz County Fair is among the nation's best. What makes our fair so good is its people. Join your friends and neighbors at santacruzvoice.com as we preempt our local programming Wednesday through Saturday to feature the people of the fair, its staff, volunteers, contestants, entertainers, vendors, and as many of the fair's 70,000 visitors as we can coax onto the mic. Wednesday through Saturday noon to 8 on santacruzvoice.com. And be sure to stop by the Voice broadcast booth on Apple Blossom Way and have your say. Brought to you by Anbar Moving and Storage, Back Nine Grill and Bar, Bay Federal Credit Union, Chuck Allen Properties, City of Watsonville Airport, De La Colmena Market and Catering, Eric's Deli Cafe, Freedom Meat Locker, K&D Landscaping, Knox Garden Box, Staff of Life Markets, and the Watsonville Auto Group.
You need a clean, pleasant space to conduct business, but you don't want the burden of a long, expensive lease. Your solution is Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on Soquel Avenue. Satellite offers private offices, meeting and conference rooms, even co-working by the hour, day, week, or month. Schedule a tour at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
Okay, back live, 9:30 is the time, and to work with Kimberly Strassel, her column describing just exactly who Charlie Kirk was, how he worked, and his value. He talked as an end to political violence. In a clip posted April of last year, Kirk was asked by a somewhat scornful college student, "Why are you here?" Okay, I've been asked that question a lot. First of all, The question shouldn't even have to be asked, but when people stop talking, really bad stuff starts. When marriages stop talking, divorce happens. When civilizations stop talking, civil war ensues. When you stop having a human connection with someone you disagree with, it becomes a lot easier to want to commit violence against that group. What we as a culture have to get back to is being able to have a reasonable disagreement where violence is not an option. Charlie Kirk explaining beautifully cogent, coherent, giving examples, just exactly why debate and discussion should be permitted but are absolutely imperative. I'm reminded of one of Winston Churchill's more pithy quotes. Jaw, jaw is better than war, war. Meaning that talking is preferable to killing. I don't believe this needs any elaboration or explanation. I believe this is one of those truths that is self-evident. Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. It was with this goal that Charlie Kirk built his platform of touring the country, in particular universities, to engage in debate with critics. He was forthright. He didn't mince words or soften his views to mollify an audience. He confronted touchy subjects with statements that sent the politically correct people around the bend. But he didn't dodge questions. He didn't respond in anger, no matter how furious or provocative the questioner. He debated people's propositions, not their integrity. He talked to ensure we keep talking. That example of civil debate was ended yesterday when a craven gunman, someone willing neither to talk or to listen, ended Kirk's life while he spoke at Utah Valley University. Even before the official news came of Kirk's death, the press and social media began to roll with the evidence of how badly we need more of Kirk's message. On MSNBC, Democratic commentator Matthew Dowd explained, I always go back to hateful words. Hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which lead to hateful actions. Which exactly misses the point. Sticks and stones. Speech is the alternative to hateful action, not its excuse. Mr. Dowd later apologized and was fired by MSNBC. Other comments on social media. I swear to God, if Hitler got shot, people would be saying, keep him in our prayers, and political violence is never okay. Like, no. Another. Thoughts and prayers to the Bullets family. Unquote. Ew. The Hill reported on Wednesday evening that when GOP Representative Lauren Boebert requested someone lead the House of Representatives in public prayer for Kirk and his family, groans and shouts of no broke out, provoking a shouting match between Republicans and Democrats on the floor of the House of Representatives of the United States of America. Shouting, not talking. It's notable that few, if any, of our elected representatives, the institutional embodiment of civil society, engage in anything resembling the outreach or encouragement or engagement of Charlie Kirk. Washington politics is rarely any more about ideas, education, persuasion, or constructive argument. It's partisan blood sport. Players vie for pole position in the race for nasty put-downs and righteous anger. In moments staged for viral sensation, those lamenting Kirk's death celebrate his success in creating a conservative movement, seem to miss that he did so by reaching out, not lashing out. Ooh, I'll bet you're proud of that one. I'm going to try to remember that. I love that. Reaching out, not lashing out. You know, I've mentioned, I'll mention again, I've seen a lot of video excerpts of Charlie Kirk. If you go to YouTube and type in Charlie Kirk, there's a lot of stuff there. And all the ones I've seen are excerpted from his appearances, generally at campuses, quite often in outdoor events. such as the one a few days ago. And they seem to follow a form. There's a microphone set up for interlocutors from the audience to come up and have their say. Kirk listens to them, hears them out, responds, and does not hammer them. And, this is interesting because quite often the come on, the YouTube come on is, let's just be gentle and say, inaccurate. Charlie Kirk shuts down student. Charlie Kirk obliterates somebody. And, as you read these things, you think, well, this Charlie Kirk guy, he's really a howitzer on wheels here. But then you click and you watch the clip, and instead of obliteration or shutting down, you see conversation. You don't see Kirk backing down. He's he stands his ground. But he is not interested in obliteration or shutdowns. He's interested in bringing people along. He's interested in convergence. He's interested in reaching accommodations, and he always remembers that he's not only talking with the person he's talking with, it's the audience. After all, if you have hundreds, thousands of people, how many of them are actually coming to the microphone and talking with you? A tiny fraction. Most of them are just there to hear the debate. And Kirk always has them foremost in mind. He's not trying to push them away. He's a smart enough man to understand that obliterations and put-downs are not attractive. That rather instead they are repulsive and that they will drive people away. As I'm speaking this and I'm thinking of the way Charlie Kirk conducted himself, I'm thinking, why doesn't somebody get the essence of Charlie Kirk and inject some of it into Donald Trump? He could use it. Donald Trump would be a far more popular man in America today if he conducted himself as Charlie Kirk does. I've had people over the years, the 10 years that we've been dealing with Trump, they say, oh, you want him to be a namby-pamby, you want him to be a wishy-wash. Okay, is that how you view Charlie Kirk? Was he a namby-pamby? Was he a wishy-wash? Not only no, but hell no. He stood his ground. But he did so in a civil way and in a way that was designed and was effective at actually cajoling people. Hey, come along. These ideas actually are good. These ideas actually have currency. Maybe you should go along with some of this. That was Charlie Kirk's value. Reaching out, not lashing out. Those politicians are saying all the usual things now, decrying political violence, sending out prayers, just as they did after the first assassination attempt against Donald Trump, and the second one, and the shooting of Steve Scalise, and of Gabby Giffords, and the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband, and the attempt on Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and the slaying of a Minnesota state legislator and her husband, and the murder of 2 staffers at the Israeli embassy, and the arson attacks against Pennsylvania's governor's mansion, and the New Mexico Republican Party headquarters. The good behavior lasts a day, well, maybe a week. This editorial page has frequently emphasized the importance of civil and societal guardrails. These are built from the top. A nation that sees its leaders being respectfully in debate with others, pardon me, trying to read it at an angle here. A nation that sees its leaders respectfully debate each other's ideas, invite opposing views, and seek to persuade will rightly assume that the correct way to hash out political disagreements is just that. A nation that sees its leaders vilify opponents, blame opponents and individuals rather than their policies for problems, and spew rage and tantrums will understandably assume it's acceptable to treat anyone who disagrees with them with contempt. We have our first caller on the line today, and it's Greg. And I am looking forward to hearing what he has to say. So let's find that out. Plenty of time. Good. Well, Greg, how you doing?
Good morning, Charles.
Yes, sir. It sure is. Thank you for calling.
Well, you're welcome. Kirk. It really saddens me to see that political violence took his life. You know, Charlie represented, God and faith and family and country. And he had a very open style, his Prove Me Wrong forums on the campuses touched me. I've been following him for a long time. I believe like Charlie did. And he really helped my youngest son, who is 1 year younger than him.
Mm-hmm.
When he was in school, this is a lefty area here. A lot of his peers are lean left, and so do the teachers. And so to have a conservative viewpoint, he was scorned. He was shut down, and it stifled him in high school. He went to Catholic elementary, and then he went junior high and high school secular. When he got into college, he was really following Charlie, and I guess it got through to him to stand up no matter what your opponents are saying about you, and he wanted to show, I'm a right-wing conservative. I am a Christian, and I believe in with the Republican Party, their message. So on CSUMB campus, where he graduated from, he got with the Republican Party a little booth and a table to promote the Republican Party. And he was met with spit and screaming and yelling at him, calling him, fascist and all kinds of different names, up to the point where his table was overturned. Nothing was done, even though he complained. Nothing was done to, protect his right to speak, because it was a conservative viewpoint, a Christian viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So Charlie, in his work, was responsible for making my son stand up and see that he could have his opinion, and he would be, maybe contested, maybe even violent, but he stood there and he said, I wanted to beat the hell out of them, but I couldn't. He said half of them were girls. So he stood his ground, and I think I attribute that to the work of Charlie Kirk and the youth. He really reached a lot of youth, and, he debates where, he kills them with kindness. Absolutely not going to be confrontational and name-calling and screaming. No, he has his convictions. He bases it on the fact that he believes and wants to promote. So his motive is to have a dialogue, because he feels that silence leads to violence. Really true. I just wanted to say that what got us here, that young youth like this would take action, I think is multifactorial. He's twisted, number one, to commit the act. But has he been twisted or pushed to that point because he hears rhetoric like Hitler, fascist, threat to democracy, all these different things? that should, I believe in free speech, but when you have a congresswoman calling the president a fascist, which he is not, there's something wrong with that. When Elena Omar says that we are all pieces of SHI, just recently, we are, you and I, because we're Republicans and we believe the way we do. That degradation makes it easy for somebody who's twisted, been indoctrinated, and has been, hate brewed into him, easier for him to pull the trigger and not humanize. And one other point is, the way Congress acted, some members that you were speaking of, not allowing a prayer to be offered for Charlie Kirk. I think that's despicable, and it's a problem because what used to really congeal the Republican and Democratic Party in the House is the belief in God and also the belief in capitalism, which, it's divided now. So I think those are two things that really help polarize our Congress and our country. And it's just a great loss and hard shoes to fill. But President Trump says he thinks that his death will cause him to be even larger and his voice that he had to be even larger. And I tend to believe that, too.
That's possible. I hope.
What are your thoughts?
That's possible. I hope that turns out to be the case. And the more as I say, I've looked at a number of Kirk videos, and the idea that he operates by reaching out, not lashing out. That's what Kimberly Strassel describes here, and that is a beautiful way of putting it. And that type of an approach is so unusual in today's politics that it makes him almost a unique character on both the right and the left. And since his assassination on was it Monday or Tuesday that he was shot? I mean, just a couple of days ago, and we've seen other examples of, like when Steve Scalise, he's the majority whip in the House of Representatives. He didn't die, but he was hospitalized and very seriously wounded, almost killed. And there was nowhere near this degree of public impact. It is becoming more and more clear to me that the idea I had of Charlie Kirk being someone who was really exceptional, I was only grasping a little of that. I was not really understanding just how exceptional this fellow really was. And I remember seeing, Kimberly Strassel quotes this answer he gave, "Why are you here?" I've been asked that a lot. The question shouldn't even have to be asked. When people stop talking, really bad stuff starts. When marriages stop talking, divorce happens. When civilizations stop talking, civil war ensues. It becomes a lot, when you disconnect, you stop having a human connection with someone you disagree with, it becomes a lot easier to want to commit violence against that group. We have to get back to reasonable disagreement where violence is not an option. So Charlie Kirk was almost a Gandhi-like figure in that sense. He's calling for debate and no holds barred debate. Let's go at it. Let's talk about these ideas, but by the rules. You don't criticize a person. There's no ad hominem. You stick to the issues. You talk about, we're here to debate ideas and questions, not personalities. And again, I'm hoping that as he praises Charlie Kirk, that maybe Donald Trump might somehow ingest a little bit of this because he could use it?
Well, Charlie Kirk's style wouldn't work for Donald Trump.
Sure it would.
Donald Trump is who he is. He's a tough guy, super tough.
You telling me that
And
Charlie
I think
Kirk
he's a
isn't
good
tough?
man.
Here's a guy who went onto college
think he's-
campuses.
no.
Wait a second. Here's a guy who went
I
onto
didn't say he
college
wasn't
campuses.
He's tough in a different way.
The inference was,
tough
well,
in a
Trump is tough.
different
Kirk is
way.
a squish. No, he isn't a squish. Kirk is more effective than
I didn't
Trump.
say that.
I'm saying that Kirk showed us. I mean, he led the best way he could by example. He showed us what can be done and how to do it. And the more people on both the left and the right look to this guy as a role model, the better off we'll all be.
Well, I agree with that. And I'm not saying Charlie was not tough. He stood for his convictions and had a lot of opposition. Donald Trump is a successful businessman, and his style is it's different style. And it's
I understand
won
that.
him the presidency. So he's
But
effective in debating and negotiating.
It's won him the presidency by an eyelash twice. But a Charlie Kirk,
Good, and Charlie helped.
a Charlie Kirk would have
help
been
that.
a Charlie Kirk would have been capable of a far greater victory, and of far greater effectiveness once in office. Now it's all about moving people. Charlie Kirk's the kind of a guy who actually moved people, who brought them together rather than pitting one side against the other. And at the end,
Charles,
my
what do you
stacks.
call the MAGA movement? What do you call the MAGA movement, Charles?
Preaching to the choir.
A weak little.
No, I call it preaching to the choir. That's a very good question, Greg, and so I'm glad you asked it. I call it preaching to the choir. Getting together all of the people who are predisposed towards you, and in many cases actually repelling or driving away anybody who is insufficiently orthodox. Charlie Kirk never drove away anybody.
Well, the MAGA movement wants to accept people into it. We've made Democrats Republicans. Too many Republicans going, but we've done that, and
we've seen plenty,
converted
we've
people
seen,
over
unfortunately,
with the MAGA movement.
Unfortunately, we've seen quite a few Republicans, people who should be part of the new conservative movement, leaving it for various reasons. I mean, when you see somebody like Liz Cheney, who's a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, and she leaves. Why? Well, there are certain things she just couldn't stomach.
Because she's full of hate. That's why.
Oh, come on.
She's full of hate.
No, I don't.
And vengeance for her father.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I remember when
I have my beliefs and you have yours, but
that's true. But
back to Charlie.
Years ago, when before Donald Trump ever came down the escalator, back during the George W. Bush administration, Dick Cheney was vice president, and I always referred to him on my program as the evil Dick Cheney, not because I thought that, because I had great admiration for him. I thought he was effective as hell, but because he drove the other side as crazy then as Donald Trump does today. Really, quite literally. And so I always, did my best to placate the left by referring to him as the evil Dick Cheney. But the Cheney, just one example. These are dyed-in-the-wool conservatives, patriots, Christians, salt of the earth, real Americans. And to have people like that driven out of the party for unorthodoxy, it's the answer to your point. You say, we've welcomed former Democrats into the party. Well, we've also seen a lot of good Republicans leave it, so that goes both ways.
Yeah, that's a matter of opinion on the Cheneys for me. Anyway, that's what I have to say. I think Charlie Kirk is a big loss, and I hope his organization continues, and I hope somebody, probably his wife, might fill his shoes. So we'll see. Only
I'm
time will tell. But the one other thing did have to say is
yes.
they're complaining that they used Air Force Two to transfer his body,
Hmm.
and I think that was so appropriate for what he's done for the last election. Frankly,
I'm glad you
he moved a
mentioned.
lot of youth towards the Republican Party.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I noticed that Air Force. Thought to myself when I saw that, oh boy, I'll bet that's going to cause a lot of screaming, maybe. And here you are pointing out that yes, that's exactly what happened. Um, at this point, quibbling of that sort is best left unsaid. But again, Mr. Kirk, part of his effectiveness was that he drove the far left completely crazy because they perceived him as being so effective, so persuasive, so good at what he did. But they hated him because he was really the best of the best.
Yes, and if I had my way, his funeral would be held at the Capitol. I think because he died in a political assassination as such, it would be appropriate to give him that honor. He's getting a Medal of Freedom honor.
Yeah, I heard about
so
that.
I think it would also solve a lot of security problems for all the people that are going to be there. Anyway, and it would be a great honor to him too. That's what I have to say this Friday.
Thank
And
you.
I'll talk to you later.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Have a great weekend.
You too.
Well put. Well put. And I just as I look more at these words that Kimberly Strassel shared with us. Let me see. We've still got a minute or so. I'll finish up a little more of this. A nation that hears its leaders darkly warn on a daily basis that their opponents are hell-bent on imposing tyranny is more liable to justify any action in response. An media that has made a business model out of amplifying the showboats, mouth-offs, and provocateurs rather than giving attention to serious players only eggs it all on. This is reminiscent of what I said a few minutes ago. The idea that Stephen King goes out and says, Charlie Kirk advocated the stoning of homosexuals. He didn't. He didn't. But is it possible that the assassin thought so? I wonder how many other things the assassin thought about Charlie Kirk that weren't true. Hateful, divisive, but if you hear it often enough and loud enough, some of it soaks in. Joseph Goebbels knew that, and he was right about that. It's 10 o'clock. Okay. Let's see here. Check the email. Boop, 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 boop. Uh-huh. Punk. Hour number 2 begins. Yes, indeed. 10:06, time for us to begin another hour of today's program. We had one exceptional phone call so far today in the first hour. How about you doing the next one? 831-265-5050. Love to hear from you. It is time, I think, maybe to move on to another topic. There's other things happening, but now remember the way it works. If you want to call in and talk about, whoops, we've got somebody on the line already. Evan is here. Let's find out what's on his mind today. Perhaps it'll be something about Mr. Kirk, perhaps something else. Let's ask him. Hello, Evan. Good morning.
Unfortunately, it's kind of the same topic. I called in talking about a post my mother posted on Facebook. It was kind of a leftist thing about Charlie Kirk. It was a thing about a college professor, Stacy Pattern.
Yeah, we kind
Anyway, a long story.
We kind of let it.
Yeah, long story short here. What was kind of interesting is I just wanted to kind of point out the fact that I think we need a little bit more debates. The fact that another friend of my mom's said, "Hey, no, that was wrong," and she pointed out some facts, and my mom's like, "Hey, great, I agree with you." So we just kind of need a little bit more debates, and hopefully people kind of agree rather than disagree. But I just wanted to kind of call in and wish you a happy Friday, sir, and thank you for taking my calls, and get back to your show, sir. So thank you, and have a great rest of your weekend too.
Okay, thanks very much for the call. Have a great day.
You too.
Okay, well, hard to take exception to that. I mean, a call for more debate rather than less. This is what Charlie Kirk was all about. This is what he did. He went from university campus to university campus, holding conversations, taking on all comers. That was his MO. That was what his events were. They were a series of conversations, many of which were quite confrontational, but over issues and ideas. Okay, as I said, other things have happened. Yesterday, I actually, during the second hour, I was able to talk a little bit about President Putin's attack on Poland. Now, this may sound, well, it may sound strange, seeing as how all the media attention right now is on Charlie Kirk, but frankly, in terms of the great flow of world events, what is going on between, in Europe right now is actually more important. Why can I say that? Well, because it's a war, and not just one person is killed. People are being killed on a daily basis. This is simply a reality. It's not a pleasant reality. It's a test for NATO. The idea that Russia has now started sending drones over Polish territory, and NATO has to shoot them down there. Well, yesterday we were all wondering, what will President Trump say? Today, we have his comments. Nearly half a day After NATO ordered jet fighters to shoot down Russian drones over Polish territory, President Trump issued his first public comment on the incident, writing on his social media platform Truth Social. What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go. That's the extent of it. Trump's seemingly ambiguous reaction stood in contrast to those of European leaders who swiftly and universally condemned the drone incursion as a dangerous escalation by Moscow. It marked the first time in history of the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance and its forces engaged Russian military hardware over territory and came amid increasing Russian attacks on Ukrainian civilian targets as U.S.-led peace efforts run aground. This situation brings us to the closest we've been to open conflict since World War II. Those are the words of the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk. Trump spoke by phone on Wednesday with Polish President Karol Nawrocki. Dutch F-35 and Polish F-16 jet fighters downed Russian drones that had flown deep into Polish territory. The United States has about 7,500 troops stationed in Poland, though that number fluctuates as troops routinely rotate throughout Europe. The Russian drone incursion was likely meant to be a test by Moscow of NATO's response and resolve. 4 senior European officials said they cautioned, however, that the drones could have entered NATO airspace as a result of malfunction or electronic warfare and jamming. I'm sorry. 1 or even 2 maybe. 19? No, this was done with malice aforethought. They said Trump's first message on the matter has rattled nerves in European capitals for not underscoring U.S. commitments to defend NATO territory. Perhaps President Trump is under the impression that, we signed the treaty and we made the commitment, and therefore restating it is not necessary. To which I reply, oh yes it is. Sometimes restatements are imperative. As I think about that, let me give you an example. Many years ago, my first girlfriend, young love, and I remember her telling me, my father only told my mother he loved her twice. Once when he proposed, and again on their wedding day. And they've been married now for many, many years. And I was in the next room, I heard them talking. And Mom said to Dad, why don't you ever tell me you love me? And he said, don't be ridiculous. I told you I loved you when I asked you to marry me and when we got married. In other words, I haven't changed my mind. I made the commitment. You have it. But hearing it again and again is important. Now, obviously, there's a big difference between the love of a marital relationship and an international commitment, but in some ways, they're similar in that restatement is not a waste of time or an exercise in repetition. It is valuable communication. Maybe you understand your commitment and that you have not shied away from it, but does the other party understand that? Maybe, maybe not. To remind them occasionally, possibly even frequently, is a good idea. There's definitely no reason to suspect this was a course correction, a mistake, or anything like that, said German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius. They wouldn't have to take this route to fly to Ukraine. The U.S. remains the primary military backbone of the NATO alliance. European officials say Vladimir Putin watches overtures from the U.S. president above all else on NATO. Senior European officials were quick to praise the response from the U.S. Ambassador Matthew Whit pardon me. Let me read that again properly. Senior European officials were quick to praise the response from U.S. NATO Ambassador Matthew Whitaker, who said in a post on X, "We stand by our NATO allies in the face of these airspace violations and will defend every inch of NATO territory." But those officials stressed that ultimately the U.S. president's voice matters most in critics' crisis response with Moscow. The drone incursions have revived a push in Congress to pass legislation that would impose sweeping new sanctions on Russia, as European allies urged Trump to take new actions to punish Russia economically for prolonging the Ukraine war. Senate Majority Leader John Thune said lawmakers were discussing the matter on Wednesday. The president has been growing frustrated with Russia, but so far there's been no direct action to turn up the pressure on Moscow. This according to Alina Polikova, head of the Center for European Policy Analysis. Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, its drones and missiles occasionally have violated U.S. airspace by straying into Allied territory amid attacks on Ukraine. In September 2024, a Russian drone carrying explosives crashed in Latvia. In August, Russian kamikaze drones struck a Ukrainian gas complex within half a mile of the Romanian border, prompting Romania to scramble jets in response. Well, I remember reading about the single drone hitting Latvia. I didn't remember reading about this other one, but after all, the Russian drone in that case may have been within half a mile of Romania's border, but that still means it was in Ukraine. I mean, with a border thing like this, it's kind of like in tennis. A shot is either in or out, right? But in this latest escalation, Mr. Putin is getting the idea that Mr. Trump is a louder and blusterier version of Joe Biden. And that is not a good thing. I realize that is rather a strong criticism of the president. But in this particular instance and on this particular issue, I feel very strongly. I'm grateful to the president still for acting at last to rid the world of the Ayatollah's atomic weapon. There evidently does come a time at which Mr. Trump's attention can be engaged and some action warranted. I guess I'm just living to discover what that is, and I'm concerned because I know there are people in his administration and who have his ear and speak to him every day, the Navarros and the Bannons and people like that, who will tell him, hey, we don't give a flying damn what happens in Europe. If Trump takes Ukraine, Trump takes Ukraine. If Trump then starts invading Poland, Lithuania, the Baltic states, Finland, whatever, these are NATO countries, bear in mind. These are people who are telling Trump, don't feel bound by the NATO treaty. You didn't sign it. It's a Cold War relic. It's, the whole idea was to keep Stalin from getting any further. It's all, you can figure it's just a dead letter. There are people who are telling Mr. Trump this. I'm reminded that Tucker Carlson, who is a person that Mr. Trump listens to, not part of his administration, but a person who he pays attention to, Carlson was saying, this is several weeks ago, if we take any action against Iran, thousands of Americans will die, the Middle East will erupt in flames, etc., etc. Well, Mr. Trump at length decided that something had to be done, And all of Mr. Carlson's dire predictions came to naught. None of that ghastly recitation actually occurred. Not a bit of it. We did one military operation. We did not suffer any losses at all. No equipment, no aircraft, no human beings, nothing. The only losses, I guess, well, we dropped munitions on the way over. We lost those, but after all, that was the point of the mission, so you can't really count those as losses now, can you? Granted, they didn't come back, but they weren't supposed to. Anyway, we've already had one example of alarmist isolationists counseling the president. If you act, horrible things will happen. The president acted and horrible things didn't happen. This is one other thing I hope Mr. Trump will retain in mind. The bombing mission that took out the Ayatollah's atomic weapon is one of the triumphs of his administration thus far, and universally recognized as such. The idea of throwing away the accomplishment and the credit that he built with that decisive action by being irresolute. There's a good word. By being irresolute in Europe and in standing up to today's tyrant. I mean, you know, this we always have tyrants du jour. Bill Clinton was really lucky. During his 8 years in office, we didn't have any great malevolence that we were looking at. China was on the rise at that time, but had not yet reached the position of being a great international competitor to the United States. The Soviet Union had fallen apart. We were at that moment busily failing to consolidate a friendly pro-Western regime in Russia. That, you know, you want to blame this on somebody, blame it on Bill Clinton, blame it on George Bush Sr. They're the ones who were in office when the Soviet Union did fall and when its various component states, I mean, the Baltic states, left and became NATO members. Ukraine became an independent country. The Central Asian republics became independent countries. The Caucasian republics, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, all became independent nations. Many of them became pro-Western. But the big one, by far, was Russia. 98% of the territory, 90% of the population. Holy smoke. You make absolutely positive that once you've won the war, you also win the peace. This is something Bushes don't do. Yesterday we had a caller who was talking with me about W's adventures in Iraq. And one thing we were sure as hell able to agree on, they won the war. They overthrew Saddam Hussein in 3 weeks, something like that, and then proceeded over the next several years to brutally and bloodily lose the peace. That made a mess. That mess is nowhere near as big as the one that Bush and Clinton made by losing the peace with Russia. Obviously, Russia, a far more consequential country than Iraq. America seems to have become adept at this. The only, I'm turning it over in my my mind. The only military adventure I can think of in the past, in the post-war era, we won the war and won the peace. Grenada was an example. Tiny country, but we sure did a good job there. Zach is on the line. Let's grab his phone call and find out what he has to say today. Hello, sir. Good to hear from you.
Hey, Charles. Happy Friday. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I sure can. Go ahead.
Excellent. I'm in a weird spot as usual. I'm on the job site. So, hey, I just calling to get your opinion on something about this whole Russia sending drones into Poland. I've just went, whoa, that sounds like a breach of Article 5 or whatever it is. But then I was talking to another person about it, and they think that maybe, and I was like, I don't know, but they think that maybe, what side do you think India and China would take if there was a NATO alliance against Russia? Would they enter into a conflict, do you think?
No.
'Cause I don't know.
No, I don't think so. Russia has solicited troops from North Korea. They've got some North Koreans fighting in Ukraine. But the only thing they're depending on for China, China helps them finance their war effort. China buys their oil more than any other country. India is buying their oil, but not in anywhere near the amount that China is. This is one reason why I think it's interesting. President Trump is imposing tariffs and punishing India, but not China. In other words, he's punishing the by far lesser offender and giving the greater offender a pass. Now, why he's doing that, he may have reasons, but it's not really a rational policy. Back to your question, if Russia decides to start a European war, again, they're not going to be depending on China to fight it for them. They will do it themselves. They'll lose. I mean, Russia is much weaker than NATO. The only reason that Russia would be able to make any headway is lack of political will. NATO is militarily powerful enough to withstand a Russian attack and to throw it back. The question is whether the people who give the orders, the civilians who are in charge of those militaries, would actually direct them to do so. That's the question. That's the question I have about Trump right now. Putin is making these incursions, and President Trump is saying, "Here we go." What the hell does "here we go" mean? A clear
that's what I was wondering.
A clear statement would be, earlier in the program we were talking about Charlie Kirk and how he viewed debate and expression as valuable things. In international politics, clarity is a value, and if Mr. Trump wishes to preserve the peace, this is the time to be very clear to Vladimir Putin about just exactly what he will and won't tolerate. And the idea that an attack on a NATO country would trigger a response that Mr. Putin would not want.
Yeah, I thought that same thing. I thought, why would China enter in? Because, we're their greatest marketplace, I think. Maybe Europe is also.
No,
but
we are.
China just wants to make money. Oh, we are? Okay. Well, they want to make money. And maybe that's why Trump isn't being so harsh on the tariffs to China as they are, as he is India. Anyway, I don't know. But, that's, I don't know what Russia's thinking. I don't know. They lost 1 million soldiers from what I understand. So they've depleted themselves just by the stupid invasion of Ukraine. They're just senselessly going about things, and it's amazing to me. It's a lot of strange. That's just adds to the strange things going on in the world. And that's the big one, though. Yeah, I agree that's such a big issue because Russia is nuclear. They have a nuclear arsenal, but I think that even they have a series of checks before something's launched. They're not just going to let Putin I don't think. I don't know how they do it, what their protocol is. Like, can Putin just press a button? I don't know. I hope not, because he seems irrational completely. But
I agree with that.
I don't know.
This is why earlier in the program I was describing him as more dangerous than the leaders of the Soviet era, because at least with them you could count on the reality of mutual assured destruction, the idea that you had leaders like Khrushchev or Brezhnev, neither of whom were interested in either their own destruction or the destruction of their countries. With Putin, you've got a guy who's much more like Adolf Hitler, who was perfectly willing to see the entire country destroyed and him with it, just to fight this last-ditch effort against the evil forces of capitalism and Jewry. Weird stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, really. Oh my gosh. I could talk about a lot of things, but I probably maybe you have other stuff you'd want to talk about. Have been enjoying your show, and
well, of course, you know
that's
the
all I
rule.
got. Really, I guess I could talk.
When you make a call, you're welcome to discuss what you want to discuss. So if there's something else you want to put on the table, you go right ahead.
All right. Okay. Well, something I've formed my own opinion already, but I could be swayed to think differently. I think it'd be hard, but. What do you think of the newest September 8th Supreme Court decision on, rather than having to have a probable cause to stop ICE, okay, I'm talking about ICE having a probable cause to stop somebody, rather now the Supreme Court ruled you could have reasonable suspicion. What do you, I don't know, I formed my opinion. I'll just give you my opinion first. My opinion is I think that's a slippery slope. I think it's somewhat immoral, because not only are they now saying, well, you could look at a person's skin color, but also now, because they're trying not to look like racists. Now they're looking at it as, well, we can judge somebody by how they're speaking and their job. It's like, oh, now they're judging on class. So it's like, it seems to me the Supreme Court decision will yield results. I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to get more people who are illegal to leave, or to catch them being illegal. But I think that it's a very slippery slope when you say, you could detain somebody without having, a warrant or probable cause. It's just reasonable suspicion. It's like using the broken window theory on human beings. I don't know if that's. I think that's wrong. What do you think?
It's basically the same issue you had with stop and frisk in New York and other cities where this was used. The rationale for that was, look, you've got a lot of guns out on the street, many of them in the hands of criminals, and this constitutes a danger to the community. So what do? You tell your police officers who are out there, and generally who know who the bad actors are and aren't. You tell them, look, if you have reasonable suspicion that somebody might be carrying a lethal weapon, you could say, hey, let's go through your pockets, find out what you got here. The impact of that was to get hundreds and hundreds of guns off the streets, and each one of them taken from a potential user of a gun to commit a crime. And also there's the other factor. Many criminals, these are not stupid people. Just because you're a criminal doesn't necessarily mean you're dumb. They get the idea, hey, if I go out and I'm carrying my Glock, what if I'm stopped and frisked? The police are going to have my gun, and I'm going to be standing gun charges and probably do some jail time. So maybe I'd better leave it at home. And, of course, as I point out often, there's no way of keeping negative statistics. So there is no statistical way of showing how many criminals simply voluntarily disarmed themselves, left their guns at home because of this policy. So I go through all this to say that sometimes if you're attempting to accomplish a valuable goal in the community, there are methods that you employ that are subject to these questions, and I hear your concerns loud and clear. But this is the other side of the coin. You're trying to accomplish something, and this is a valuable tool for accomplishing it. Insofar as immigration is concerned, I would hope that authorities would make it clear that they're looking for people who evidence particular behaviors or otherwise in which they decide, who to ask. Hey, do you have a green card? Let's see your driver's license, something of this nature. But the major, since Donald Trump took office, there have been, I don't know how many deportations. There have been a few thousand people deported. From what I understand, from more than one source, over 1 million people have what they call self-deported. They've decided, ICE is really serious now. They're actually, the Santa Claus is now dead, and they're looking for people who are in the country illegally. And so maybe what I'd better do before I'm apprehended and something bad happens, maybe it'd be smart to just tiptoe back home. And 1 million people have done that. That has been the real impact so far. If measures the government takes can convince people to comply with the law. This is, they call it self-deporting. I call it complying with the law. They committed an infraction. They say, bad idea. I'm going to get right. I'm going to obey the law. I'm getting out and going back where I belong. I'm all for this if it can convince significant numbers of people to conform to the law and obey.
Sure. Hello?
Yeah, I'm listening. Go ahead.
Awesome. I'm sorry. The phone cut out for a second. I just was going to say, the fact that it got people to self-deport, that's good. And maybe that's what this will have an effect. But I don't know. I've heard anecdotal stories of actual citizens. One was a military vet, the story that I heard, of being detained for 3 days. I'm sure that's not the norm, but if that goes on in a more of a mass case, there might be some lawsuits. The courts might be filling up there.
True.
if you're
and this,
but I guess that's the risk you take.
And that imposes a break and a discipline on enforcement agents. They have to know that if they screw up, they will be held accountable.
Yep, that's true. That is true. The law is the law, even with the law. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you let me bring that up. It's just that those two things were the tip of my mind of worldly concerns. And I've been watching Turner Classic Movies all week. I've been out of town working. What's that?
I said, ha-ha.
Yes. Oh, yes. The phone is being weird now. I watched Miss, what was it called? I watched Showboat. That was good. Liked it. And I watched Miss Pinkerton, which I didn't really like that much. I don't know. I thought it would have been a little bit better.
Isn't that Joan Blondell?
That doesn't ring a bell.
And she's a nurse, and she gets involved in solving a crime.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a B picture. It's Warner Brothers, so it's a Warner Brothers picture, so it moves. I mean, it goes by in 66 minutes, something like that. And it's
exactly.
That's designed as a programmer. That would be the back end of a double bill. But frankly, Joan Blondell is one of those people that I would pay money to see her belch. She's just so pretty and so talented. Even if she's in, a not too impressive film, I like Joan Blondell so much that I always want to see her. She made a number of movies in the early and mid-'30s where she was paired with Glenda Farrell. And the two of them made kind of a team together. And in several films, they played wisecracking, fast-talking, gold-digging women. And those are funny. So if you ever see something that has Joan Blondell and Glenda Farrell, buy a bag of popcorn and sit down.
Yeah, that's how I felt about her acting. She was more of a comedian than a serious, because it was kind of a serious plot. and I was like, I'm laughing more than I'm engaging, I guess. That's what I was thinking. I was like, it was kind of it's kind of silly, you know.
It was.
But,
yeah,
but yeah, it was,
it's supposed to be for laughs.
Yeah. Yeah, it was still, you know, fun and entertaining, but it just wasn't like what I expected, I guess. Because I'm thinking, ooh, Miss Pinkerton, wow, that sounds.
Yeah, you think it's going to be a serious whoddunit, and instead it's much lighter. Well,
right,
again,
it's much lighter.
If let me see, there was a series of movies that starred Edna Mae Oliver as this, you know, obviously, you know, this school marm type, and she goes around solving crime. She's kind of a Miss Marple type figure. Those also are half comedy. She has her pal in them, her alter ego is James Gleason, who's, you know, the bald deadpan guy. Those are, again, mysteries. They're all whodunits, but they're more for laughs than for a mystery plot.
Got it. Okay. I guess there's a few of those made. All
sure.
right.
Yeah, it was a genre.
Huh. Well, I'll have to I'll have to watch more of those and know what to expect next time. But yeah, and I don't know what the overarching theme of Showboat was. I thought, is the overarching theme like, don't be a degenerate gambler and lose your family? I was like,
well, that's one of them.
Because I remember you were saying there's kind of
if you really want to find out what the overarching theme is, you're going to buy Edna Ferber's book and read it. Because you remember in the beginning of the movie, you had that really dramatic scene where there are two characters. There's a husband and wife. They're a married couple, but one of them, the wife, has, you know, like her grandmother or great-grandmother or something, was a Negro.
Yeah.
And so she has this tiny bit of Negro blood, and, well, the law is even the tiniest bit of Negro blood, and you're a black. And so he cuts her and swallows a few drops of her blood so that he has her blood in him, in his stomach. And the guy comes in and he says, we understand you got a case of miscegenation here. We got a white man married to this Negro woman. And he says, I have more than a drop of Negro blood in me. And, of course, at that point, they remember, these two had been headliners in the show. He's the leading man. She's the leading lady. But all of a sudden, nothing has changed. They're the same people they've always been. But all of a sudden, they're Negroes, and they can't be in the show anymore. So the point is to call attention. Remember, this was 1927. The point is to call attention to the stupidity, irrationality, nonsense, and BS of the color line.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I got that. But I didn't really get later, that definitely, the fact that they weren't in it.
But you don't see them in the rest of the movie. And I'm convinced that I've never read the book, but I'm convinced that in the book they figure again in the plot. And, you know, you learn that, well, as a result of this, you know, terrible things happen and they're cast out of... incidentally, one thing, the woman in that couple, of course, was Helen Morgan. And she gets a couple of songs in the movie. Now, Irene Dunn was known as a great singer. And she's got a beautiful soprano voice. But for me, Helen Morgan is even more to my taste. She's got a slightly lower voice. And she's the greatest torch singer I think I've ever heard, or certainly one of the best. And her numbers in there are really impressive. Bill was one of them. And the other, Can't Help Loving That Man of Mine, I believe. But a fantastic singer. Anyway, that's one of the major, you know, messages of showboat is a statement against the color line, which in 1927 was ironclad.
I guess I should have picked up on that at a more certain level, that they weren't in it anymore. That's a statement. Ah, dang it. But I did notice that, I was like, oh, that's tough.
Yeah,
The sheriff was just...
That was, in those days, that was the law. And like in those days, my marriage would be illegal.
Yeah, and that's to think about. It's like, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Another reason I, was thinking about the Supreme Court case, but it's there. I know what they're trying to do. I'm not being hyperbolic about it. I don't think.
No, of course not.
Back of my mind, I'm thinking.
No, there's you're raising concerns, which is not only valuable but imperative.
Yep. That's all I got. That's all. My mind is totally empty now of.
Not every day you hear somebody admit that.
Thoughts. Yeah, I'll admit anything. Oh yeah.
Well, thank you for the call.
Me to court. Okay. Thanks for taking it.
Have a good day. And I tell you what, you see, well, you want to call the program? We'll get every. What was it? Maxwell House Coffee, good to the last drop. We'll make sure that your phone call is good to the last drop. Make sure that we have an opportunity to get every bit of your comments, concerns, and observations out here on the table. 831-265-5050. Let's grab some ads. We're a little overdue.
It's high time to celebrate the opening of the new Hook Outlet Dispensary, 1129 Mission in Santa Cruz. Get in on the opening fun and really low prices on the Hook's unmatched selection of top-quality medical and recreational cannabis flower, vapes, drinks, gummies, and concentrates. The Hook Outlet is now the West Side's source for finest cannabis at the lowest prices. Get in on all the opening fun and low prices at the all-new Hook Outlet. HookOutlet.com for details and deals.
The Santa Cruz County Fair.
Our Santa Cruz County Fair is among the nation's best. What makes our fair so good is its people. Join your friends and neighbors at santacruzvoice.com as we preempt our local programming Wednesday through Saturday to feature the people of the fair, its staff, volunteers, contestants, entertainers, vendors, and as many of the fair's 70,000 visitors as we can coax onto the mic. Wednesday through Saturday noon to 8 on santacruzvoice.com. And be sure to stop by the Voice broadcast booth on Apple Blossom Way and have your say. Brought to you by Anbar Moving and Storage, Back Nine Grill and Bar, Bay Federal Credit Union, Chuck Allen Properties, City of Watsonville Airport, De La Colmena Market and Catering, Eric's Deli Cafe, Freedom Meat Locker, K&D Landscaping, Knox Garden Box, Staff of Life Markets, and the Watsonville Auto Group.
It's time now to repair or replace your roof. Hi folks, Warren Knox here of Knox Roofing. Well, we install leak-proof and fire-proof roofs. Roofs that look nice with a lot of choices of colors and styles. Gutters, skylights, insulation, and roof decks. We only install proven products with warranties unmatched by anybody. Financing is always available, and we have discounts for veterans and seniors. Do business with Knox Roofing, and you'll also receive a free Knox Garden Box. The number to call again is 831-461-0634. Thanks, folks.
At 10:49, we still have 10 minutes or so left in this hour, and I'm going to spend them getting back to this topic that I wanted to raise this hour, and that we talked some about during that previous phone call. The danger and the continued pushing and prodding of Vladimir Putin against NATO. The incursion of Russian drones into Poland marked a dangerous new phase in Moscow's confrontation with the West, posing a test for NATO allies and forcing them to divert more capabilities to the bloc's eastern flank. In recent months, Russia has increasingly put historical rival Poland in its crosshairs. Bear in mind that for centuries, Poland, like Ukraine, was a vassal state of Russia. For a couple of centuries, until World War I, There was no Polish state. Modern Poland didn't come into being until 1919. Previous to that, Poland had been subsumed into Russia. And to a guy like Vladimir Putin, what does that mean? That means that Poland is Russian territory. And the Poles are Russian vassals. Mr. Putin is about restoring territory and vassalage in Ukraine. Wouldn't he think the same about Poland? Be illogical if he didn't. The drone incursion into Poland this week was the first time warplanes from NATO engaged Russian aerial weapons over alliance territory. Putin is testing us with this, said Germany's defense chief, General Carsten Brewer. He will judge us on our reaction. There's been no formal assessment of whether the incursion was deliberate. Oh, come on, please. But the intelligence services of NATO countries conferred on Wednesday evening and concluded it what most likely was. Duh. According to people familiar with discussions, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said 19 drones entered the country's airspace. Some were on a trajectory toward Rzów Airport, a NATO hub for aid to Ukraine. Now that's interesting. So the Ukrainians have been using their drones and missiles to target staging areas for the war. They've attacked refineries, supply dumps, ammunition dumps, etc., inside Russia. Now, Ukraine obviously is nowhere near as large as Russia, so these staging areas, like, for example, this particular airport, is a hub for aid to Ukraine, but it's on Polish territory. Maybe maybe this is how the Russian government, how Putin would justify such an attack. Well, they're aiding and abetting the Ukrainians. Yeah, you're damn right they are. And so they should be. By that same logic, Mr. Putin would be enabled to attack virtually any European state because they are all aiding Ukraine. Poland and NATO allies scrambled Dutch F-35s and Polish F-16s, which were joined by Black Hawk helicopters and an Italian airborne warning and control plane. Hours later, Warsaw called for Article 4 consultations under the NATO Charter. The second time in the alliance's history such a step was taken to discuss a joint response. Right now, Russia is watching very carefully to see how NATO responds, what assets it uses, and what messaging it's going to have from the U.S. and other allies. This according to a retired U.S. Army colonel. They're going to see, how synchronized NATO is and what's the U.S. response. A handful of NATO capabilities had already been deployed to the bloc's east to ensure Russian attacks on Ukraine don't spill into neighboring countries. But the demands of monitoring the alliance's border are growing. In some cases, allies have been short of critical resources, a European official said. A meeting of defense officials in London hours after the incursion looked at further reinforcing the eastern flank. U.S. military officials said the Czech Republic has said it would dedicate 3 helicopters to Poland. French President Macron said France would send 3 Rafale jet fighters to protect Polish airspace. Germany will also position 2 Eurofighters on its border with Poland. So it takes this is the inconvenient thing about NATO. It being all of these different countries, with all of their different militaries, everybody has to get on the same page. Polish Defense Minister Kosiniak-Kamysz reiterated on Thursday that the Netherlands had said it would expedite 2 of 3 batteries of Patriot systems pledged to Poland and sent 300 troops to reinforce the border. Polish state news agency PAP reported this. One alliance weakness is a lack of air defense on its eastern flank, according to a NATO general tasked with air defense. A number have been provided to Ukraine, reducing NATO capabilities. The incursion also served as a way for Moscow to probe cohesion among NATO allies, which has already been strained by differences over resolving the war in Ukraine. European leaders swiftly condemned the incursion and vowed a unified response. President Trump offered a more ambiguous response. In an approach on Truth Social, he said, "What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go." Russia will be watching whether NATO countries follow up on their rhetoric. Failure could embolden the Kremlin to make more risky moves on the alliance's eastern border, made up of former Soviet republics or Cold War satellites. In other words, everything on the eastern border of NATO now is former Russian territory. I mean, Cold War satellites. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, all of those nations which were in the aftermath of World War I and historically ought to be free and independent states, were subsumed by the USSR at the end of World War II. When Hitler retreated from Europe, the Soviets came in. And unlike the United States, we were in Western Europe, we brought our forces home. The Russians never did. The Red Army stayed in all of these countries. And whenever any of them got a little bit independent, like Hungary in 1956 or Czechoslovakia in 1968, the Red Army simply nipped it in the bud. They crushed it. The Prague Spring of 1968 is a case in point. There you had Alexander Dubček, a Communist Party leader, but a reformist. At that time, the Soviet Union under Brezhnev was not interested in any reforming. Dubček's regime was crushed by tanks. And the world simply looked on. Nobody could do a thing. Everybody understood Soviet territory. The fiction of these countries' independence, I think, was as much anything else as to make sure that each of them retained a vote at the United Nations, where they constituted an entire block of votes, all of which could be manipulated at a whim by the Kremlin. So the United States had one vote at the United Nations. The Kremlin had a dozen or more. There were actually Soviet socialist republics. Ukraine had a vote at the United Nations. Does anybody believe Ukraine was an independent country? No, it was a Soviet socialist republic. And that's exactly what Mr. Putin wants it to be again. The incursion could backfire for Russia, stiffening the alliance's resistance and sparking more solidarity among NATO members, some of whom are already considering sending troops to Ukraine as a security guarantee if and when the fighting stops. Putin is testing us yet again. We will stand firm, said the United Kingdom Defense Secretary at a gathering with defense officials from France, Italy, Germany, and Poland. Poland, incidentally, it kind of reminds me of Czechoslovakia in 1938, when the Czechoslovakia was forced to stand down by the Munich Agreement. They had the capacity to resist. They had fortified positions around the Sudetenland, which was mountainous, and they had, I believe, a 90,000-man, highly trained and well-equipped army. Hitler would not have found it a walkover. Poland today is much the same. Poland has been spending, since coming out from under communism, Poland's economy has grown and developed rapidly. Their market reforms have been very effective and very positive. And with this newfound wealth, they have built a serious military. Being on the flank of the Soviet Union or of Russia and having been under the Russian yoke for centuries, they take their defense very seriously. If the Russians want to take on Poland with its NATO allies, they're going to be biting off more than they can chew. This is the one thing we hope Mr. Putin comes to understand, because if he loses sight of that, there goes world peace. It's 11 o'clock at Santa Cruz Voice. I'm Charles Freedman. One more hour to go when we get back after this news and weather at 11.
Decades, Hispanics have been considered a reliable voting bloc for the Democratic. Didn't matter who the candidate was. The assumption was, if you're a Hispanic, you vote. That didn't happen. Perhaps the of the American presidential election was the movement of Hispanic voters to the right. That shift was dramatic enough to allow Republicans to sweep the White House and the House of Representatives. This leads to some intriguing questions. Is this shift a one-off? Is there a historical precedent for this shift? What are the key causes and implications? Let's try to answer the first question by looking at some numbers. In 2012, 71% of Hispanics for Barack Obama. That dropped to 66% for Hillary Clinton in 2016. In 2020, it dropped a bit further. Joe Biden won 65% Latino vote. According to the NBC exit polls, Kamala Harris got 52% of the Hispanic vote. Donald Trump secured 46%, the highest for any Republican presidential candidate in recent memory. And what's happening with Hispanics today? Let's look at another pivotal realignment: the shift of white voters in the Democrat to Republican. For over a century, white Southerners were, for the most part, staunch, but in the late 60s, they started to trend Republican. The reason? Racism. That was the argument made by the left. They convinced, but it was. The fact is, the Southern to the GOP driven by the Democratic Party's embrace of left-wing values, big government, contempt for patriotism, and denigration of religious faith. Fast forward to today, how does the left explain Latino defection to the right? Racism. Here's how they work it out. Those Latinos who voted Republican have become tools of white supremacy, throwing misogyny, xenophobia, and it all makes sense to the left. Aside from being patronizing, this is as inaccurate as it was in explaining the white Southern shift 50 years ago. Just like those Southern whites, today's Latinos are changing their political affiliation because the Democratic Party no longer represents us. Texas, a border county that is 97% Hispanic. For a century, it was deep blue. Then, in 2024, it flipped. Democrats assumed that Hispanics near the border would support their immigration policies, but Latinos in Stark County felt the impact of those policies. Streets taken over by foreign gangs, schools flooded with migrant children. A major problem. Look at this issue: faith and traditional family values. According to a 2020 study, over 3/4 of Hispanic Americans strongly identify as Christian. Faith and traditional family values sounds a lot more in line with the Republican. Latino voters don't want their kids taught to question their gender any more than voters do. They're also insulted by such woke terms as Latinx. According to surveys, none of Latinos prefer the traditional, the cultural and linguistic preference of the very people they claim to represent. Finally, the real concern that the Democratic Party's policy sound too much like policies that drove Latinos out of their native countries. High taxes and overregulation that make it hard to start a new business. And printing money, leading to inflation. These are red flags, and Latinos are not going to vote for the party that promotes them.
Number 3 coming up. And you're here with us as we swing into the final hour of today's program. It's 11:06 at Santa Cruz Voice. The Charles Freedman radio program is News to Noon. And our telephone number remains 831-265-5050. My program is banned in Russia because... Yeah, that Putin guy, man, he don't swing. Okay. We talked during the first hour primarily about Charlie Kirk. We can continue to talk about him if you want to. Again, when you make a phone call, you get to decide what we're going to talk about. During the second hour, we focused much attention on Vladimir Putin and his attack on Poland. In the third hour today, I'm going to attempt to do something that didn't happen yesterday. This is the third big story that's breaking right now, and it's a political story, so obviously, me being a political guy, I'm paying attention to it. But Kamala Harris, the former vice president who was defeated in the presidential election last November, Kamala Harris has now joined the crowd of people writing books about her experiences during the Biden administration. Now, Ms. Harris is unique among these people. Others have been, White House staffers or aides like KJP, Karine Jean-Pierre, who wrote her tell-all book. Journalists like Jake Tapper, who are essentially attempting to excuse their own miserable performances. Gosh, President Biden really was in non compos mentis. Who knew? Well, you did, or should have, you lummox. Anyway, Kamala Harris was Joe Biden's vice president. A obviously very high-ranking member of his administration. And she was also the one who was tasked with the picking up the banner, the fallen banner, when Joe Biden essentially fell flat on his face in that debate against Donald Trump and had to be removed as Democratic Party candidate. Now, Ms. Harris has called her book 107 Days. So the focus of the book is the 107 days refers to the period of time that she had for her presidential campaign. Just 107 days. She's saying, by God, that's just not long enough to do the job. Well, obviously, the fact that she didn't have any longer was Joe Biden's doing. He was the one who was insisting on running again. And it's interesting the way her book handles this. Ms. Harris essentially throws Joe Biden under the bus in her book. And I find that interesting because she also describes herself as being exceptionally loyal, and this action of hers really is not a reflection of the way she was treated by the Biden White House. Let's put this in context. She was vice president. A vice president is essentially a creature of the president. Presidents can invite the vice president in, make them part of the administration. The first modern vice president to be given an active role in government was Richard Nixon, when President Eisenhower, remember, Eisenhower had been a general. He viewed Nixon as kind of almost a chief of staff type. Oh, yeah, he did have a chief of staff. He had, as I recall, it was Jim Hank. No, it was that guy from New Hampshire. Name slips my mind at the moment. Anyway, he regarded Nixon maybe as an executive officer, something like that, but he gave him a lot to do. And that was why Nixon in 1960 was the go-to candidate for Republicans looking for somebody to run for president. That had never happened. Run the vice president for president? Nobody ever done that. The only vice presidents anybody remembered before that were ones who had succeeded to the office because the president died. Franklin Delano Roosevelt served in office for over 12 years. He had 3 vice presidents. The only one anyone remembers is Harry Truman. Why? Because he became president. You go up to the average person, what do you think of John Garner? What do you think of Henry Wallace? They'll say, who's that? Those are the other two people who served as vice president for Franklin Roosevelt. So Eisenhower changed the paradigm, but not permanently. Many presidents after Eisenhower went back to the old model of treating the vice president basically the same way they were traditionally treated. Kennedy essentially did this to Lyndon Johnson, and Johnson did it to Hubert Humphrey. Richard Nixon had two vice presidents, neither one of which he gave much to do. Spiro Agnew went around making speeches. Gerald Ford is remembered because he became president. Jimmy Carter, being a big-hearted, magnanimous sort of guy, actually gave Walter Mondale a considerable amount of responsibility and work as vice president, which is one of the reasons why 4 years later, Walter Mondale wound up being the Democratic presidential nominee. Well, let's skip up to modern history. Joe Biden was vice president for 8 years under Barack Obama. During this time, Barack Obama essentially treated his vice president the same as vice presidents had traditionally been treated. Mr. Obama's people, the staff around him, had never cared two hoots for Joe Biden. They were with and for Obama. They really weren't even interested. We don't need a running mate. We've got this guy Obama. He's gonna pull the train, and indeed, the only reason they had a running mate was because they had to. The Constitution mandated it. So yeah, let's get this old guy. He'll reassure the party elders that we're not going too far off the leftist deep end, and they went forward from there. 8 years of being ignored, set aside, devalued, etc. And then when the 8 years ended and it came time for a new Democrat to step up and be the nominee, Joe Biden, hey, he's the vice president. Gosh, when Bill Clinton stopped, Albert Gore stepped up. Vice presidents, when Ronald Reagan quit, George Bush ran. Vice presidents have now become presidential candidates. But the Obama people told Joe, no, it's Hillary's turn. She's going to run this time. You can't win, Joe. Must have galled him. So when Joe Biden became president, he made up his mind, I'm not going to treat my vice president the way I was treated. I am not going to do that to my vice president. I won't be the way Barack Obama was to me. Mr. Biden and his staff therefore set out to be supportive of Vice President Kamala Harris. And it rapidly turned into a difficult job because, unfortunately, Kamala Harris was, is, and remains a politician of very limited talents and abilities. She simply was not up to the job. As rapidly became apparent in 2020 when she ran. Raised a lot of money, made a lot of noise, started out with a bang and ended with a whimper. She gained considerable support until people had a chance to find out a little more about her, to see her in a debate or two, to see how she conducted herself, to see what kind of an act she put on, at which point people turned away and went someplace else. This is what happens to inept politicians when they try to run for president. So, Ms. Harris became vice president, and again, Joe Biden sets out to treat her well. In her book, Ms. Harris continually accuses the Biden White House and staff of attempting to belittle her. She says they had the idea that if I looked good, that made them and President Biden look bad, that it was a zero-sum game. So they were always trying to pull me down and belittle me. That is objectively false. That is simply not true. Account after account of that administration can show where Biden administration staffers would again and again, when the vice president had made some faux pas or what is it called nowadays, a gaffe, and they would step in and do their best to paper it over and repair the damage. And so now in her book, this support and good treatment she was offered is not only not mentioned or ignored, but actually is trashed and mischaracterized. What in the world is Kamala Harris thinking? And on the topic, topic A, the 107 days. Isn't it a shame I only had 107 days? She writes that the mantra was, it's Jill and Joe's choice. It's Jill and Joe's choice. And she says this became the recited language. And she says in looking back, was this grace or recklessness? And she says it was recklessness. This was far too important a choice, and to leave it in the hands of people who were guided by their ambition and ego. Well, frankly, that is an accurate description of Joe Biden. He was ambitious and egotistical enough. Now that he's finally got the presidency that he's fought all his life for, he'll be damned if he'll give it up. People who were listening to my program at that time remember me saying so many times, it had to be pried from his nearly cold, dead fingers. So what essentially Kamala Harris is saying, that what eventually happened, which was that Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and Chuck Schumer went to see President Biden, and they beat him bloody about the neck and head, figuratively speaking. And at that point, he finally decided, oh, okay, I've got to give it up. But one thing Kamala Harris doesn't say is that even then, Biden clung to the office. Again, my listeners at the time heard this message loud and clear. And I think I'm the only person who started screaming and yelling about it. If Joe Biden was incapable of running for another term, then Joe Biden was incapable of being president. Ms. Harris calls her book 107 Days. She's complaining, once again, everything in her book is very, oh, po me, I was screwed by these people and disrespected by these people and shortchanged by these people. She's a major blame it on everybody but yourself type person. But the one thing she doesn't say is, look, if Joe Biden had done the right thing and resigned the presidency, then during those 107 days, I would have been president of the United States. Instead of a vice president running for the office, I would have been an incumbent president running to retain the office. Now, frankly, I don't know if that would have saved her or not. But it was a 2-point election. And when an election is decided by only 2 points, hey, anything can make a difference. So I've seen nothing yet. There have been, what I'm looking at here, there's excerpts from Ms. Harris' book that have been published in The Atlantic, a friendly venue, and this is what we're looking at. The entire book will be coming out presently, and she'll be doing a book tour, which will probably draw a lot of crickets and toads. But right now, what we can definitively say is Ms. Harris has a long demonstrated tendency to blame everybody else for her mistakes, shortcomings, whatever. This book is one more chapter in that unfortunate saga. She was known in earlier days as a U.S. Senator and as Vice President for huge staff turnover. People would come to work for Kamala Harris, and within a matter of a few months, they're burned out, they're leaving. According to Ms. Harris, her staff turnover was normal. She simply denies reality. She looks you straight in the eye and lies. My staff turnover was normal. No, it wasn't. Ms. Vice President, your staff turnover was excessive. And the people who left your staff did not do so in coffins. They walked out the door, and when they did, they discussed the matter. And what did they have to say? Kamala Harris is very difficult to work for. Anything that goes well is her accomplishment. Anything that goes poorly is your fault. So it's heads she wins, tails you lose. Every single time. That would be a very difficult work environment, don't you think? Ms. Harris, she doesn't see it. According to her, it's not there. She is, once again, flat out lying to you. She says, my staff turnover was normal. It wasn't. Now, if there's one thing that will happen after this book actually comes out and people read the whole thing, I believe that even a lot of Democrats might come to the conclusion, gosh, it's a good thing that this very deeply flawed and limited ability individual never made it to the White House. I mean, Donald Trump, I support most of his choices. I don't support all of them. I can be very critical of him from time to time. But is he of presidential ability? Yeah. Kamala Harris isn't. When it comes down to just a basic question of, is this person fit to walk through the door and sit down? No. Kamala Harris does not rise to that level. Now, right now, the big question about Ms. Harris, is she running for president again? I don't know the answer to that. I don't pretend to. But as I look at what we know so far of this book, it strikes me that this is not going to make such a run any easier. I've got, how about that? Yesterday's poster is still here. This is from The Intelligencer, written by Ed Kilgore, and I'll share it with you. The period of finger-pointing and blame-shifting among Democrats for their 2024 election defeat should be near its end, but not before hearing from Kamala Harris. Her book on the 2024 campaign, 107 Days, will be released on September 23rd, but The Atlantic has published an excerpt about her life as vice president prior to Joe Biden's announcement he was dropping out. The only way to put it is that Harris is seething with anger over her treatment from Team Biden before she was suddenly thrust into the global limelight as putative replacement candidate. We'll get into the details in a moment. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and run my ads for this hour. Telephone calls take precedence if you have something you would like to share. The number is 831-265-5050. I will be delighted to interrupt myself and talk with you.
It's high time to celebrate the opening of the new Hook Outlet Dispensary, 1129 Mission in Santa Cruz. Get in on the opening fun and really low prices on the Hook's unmatched selection of top-quality medical and recreational cannabis flower, vapes, drinks, gummies, and concentrates. The Hook Outlet is now the West Side's source for finest cannabis at the lowest prices. Get in on all the opening fun and low prices at the all-new Hook Outlet. HookOutlet.com for details and deals.
The Santa Cruz County Fair.
Our Santa Cruz County Fair is among the nation's best what makes our fair so good is its people. Join your friends and neighbors at santacruzvoice.com as we preempt our local programming Wednesday through Saturday to feature the people of the fair, its staff, volunteers, contestants, entertainers, vendors, and as many of the fair's 70,000 visitors as we can coax unto the Wednesday through Saturday noon to 8 on Santa.com. And be sure to stop by the Voice broadcast booth on Apple Blossom Way and have your say. Brought to you by Ann Bar Moving and Storage, Back Nine Grill and Bar, Bay Federal Credit Union, Chuck Allen Properties, City of Watsonville Airport, De La Colmena Market and Eric's Deli Cafe, Freedom Meat Locker, K&D Landscaping, Knox Garden Box, Staff of Life Markets, and the Watsonville Auto Group.
You need a clean, pleasant space to conduct business, but you don't want the burden of a long, expensive lease. Your solution is Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on Soquel Avenue. Satellite offers private offices, meeting and conference rooms, even co-working by the hour, day, week, or month. Schedule a tour at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
Okay, at 11:28, we're back live, and let's continue examining just exactly what Kamala Harris has to say about her experience as vice president. The excerpt, what we have so far of her book, begins on the day that Joe Biden finally was bludgeoned into withdrawing from the campaign. So he made a short address on television. In her eyes, the president subtly disrespected her one more time. So again, even as President Biden is stepping down, he's belittling me, he's persecuting me. I watched it at the hotel that night. It was a good speech drawing on the history of the presidency to locate his own place within it. But as my staff later pointed out, it was almost 9 minutes into the 11-minute address before he mentioned me. I want to thank our great Vice President, Kamala Harris. She's experienced, she's tough, she's capable. She's been an incredible partner for me and leader for our country. And that was it. The rest of the excerpt is an indictment of the preparation she was given for the Herculean task she inherited when Biden stepped away. The White House staff undermined her from day one, says the former vice president. When Fox News attacked me on everything from my laugh to the tone of my voice to who I dated in my 20s or claimed I was a DEI hire, the White House rarely pushed back from my actual resume. 2 terms elected DA, a top cop in the second largest Department of Justice in the United States, senator representing 1 in 8 Americans. They had huge comms team. They had Karine Jean-Pierre briefing in the press room and every day, but getting anything positive said about my work or any defense against untrue attacks against me was almost impossible. Wow. So Kamala Harris, now bear in mind this is somebody who says, my staff turnover was normal, right? And put in mind of a remark Barack Obama once made. I don't know if you recall this one or not. I can't quote it directly on the radio, but you'll get the idea. He was talking with, I think, Charlie Rose. I can't remember exactly who, but he kind of chuckled and laughed and said, I believe my own bull bleep. I thought about that. I've never let that out of my mind. I mean, all of us BS. Everyone. Are you including yourself, Charles? Absolutely. Oh, certainly. And there have been times when, hey, Charles, come on, that's nonsense. And if you're honest with yourself, you say, yeah, that's ridiculous. Don't take it seriously. But here was Barack Obama saying, no, I believe it. Here's Kamala Harris, and it seems like she's the kind of person that describes her. She believes her own nonsense. Her staff turnover is tremendous. She says it's normal. the idea that people could be worn out by the experience of working with or for her, she doesn't see it. The idea that somebody could actually be helping her, well, she doesn't see it. Obviously, they must have been sabotaging her because, after all, she lost the presidential election, and that can't possibly be any of her own fault, can it? The woman who went on The View and, in response to a softball question from an admirer, an outspoken admirer, over the last 4 years, what would you have done different? I can't think of anything. In an election where people are looking for change, you say that, and then you wonder why you lost, and you blame it on other people? Ay, coma loca nea. Indeed, says Kamala Harris, Team Biden was encouraging nasty stories about her. I often learned that the president's staff was adding fuel to negative narratives that sprang up around me. One narrative that took a stubborn hold was that I had a chaotic office and unusually high staff turnover during my first year. Instead of defending her from unfair, inaccurate stories, Biden's inner circle came up with an infernal first major policy assignment so that she could be knocked down a little bit more. Immigration. I remember that. Joe Biden actually gave her the brief, said, the border security is your baby. Actually, it was a tremendous opportunity, although it would have been very difficult. Earlier we've said, vice presidents have to function underneath the president. You can't pursue a different policy goal than your president. I'm sorry, but if you're vice president, you can't do that. You are the vice president. Your job is to be a loyal soldier. If you disagree with the president on something, you discuss it behind closed doors. You tell the president, I'm sorry, I see it this way. You might convince the president. You might change his views or ameliorate them a bit to accommodate you. But if he doesn't, you are still tasked with the job of saluting and marching out the door in lockstep behind the president, supporting every single thing he does and says. That's your job. So maybe there is some justice here in saying that Biden screwed her by making her the one in charge of border policy, because if she really had that authority, okay, you're in charge of border policy, great. Then I'm going to make sure that the border's secure. We're going to shut it down. We're going to quit letting all these people come in, hundreds of thousands a month, and we're going to knock this off. We're going to stop it. If she had done that, she might be president today. Because that's what the American people wanted done. Open borders is not a popular policy in this country. Perhaps Ms. Harris, in addition to having all these other great misunderstandings, never understood that either, because there is nothing to show that she ever actively opposed or tried to change the administration's border policies during the period of time when she was border czar. As a matter of fact, she never even visited the border. Actually, it's funny, there were Republican politicians, political opponents of hers, who were saying she ought to visit the border, giving her good advice. She wouldn't take it. Harris dutifully went on a whirlwind trip to the Latin American countries from which migrants were heading to the southern border. That's where she went. A chore that led to the ludicrous but very damaging conservative label of border czar that Republicans hit her with right down to Election Day. You heard me use it just a few moments ago. But that was the brief that President Biden gave Kamala Harris, and this was the way in which she executed that brief. No one in the White House comms team helped me to effectively push back and explain what I had really been tasked to do, nor to highlight any of the progress I had achieved. What progress? I mean, if you think that you made progress as in your time as borders are, once again, you are believing your own nonsense. Indeed, I shouldered the blame for the porous border, an issue that proved intractable for Democratic and Republican administrations alike. Now there's a ridiculous statement. The border had been fairly secure under President Trump. Mr. Biden opened it wide. Don't try to tell me that the border was the same under both Trump and Biden administrations. Once again, that is objectively, factually nonsensical, ridiculous. And yet here she is. I wonder how much of this is going to be in her book. How many statements that are just flat out wrong? Let's keep looking. Now, bear in mind the analysis I'm reading to you here from the Intelligencer is written by somebody who's friendly and sympathetic to the vice president. So he's not going out of his way to point out where she's saying things that are simply not true. She finally got the task she would subsequently shine when the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, but in her account, she was not assigned the role of chief defender of reproductive rights. She came forward of her own volition to fill the vacuum created by Biden's inhibitions about discussing abortion publicly. Here was a huge issue on which the president was not seeking to lead. Joe struggled to talk about reproductive rights in a way that met the gravity of the moment. He ceded that leadership to me. So when Democrats made a stronger than expected showing in the midterms, she should have gotten some real credit. Certainly within the White House, she clearly believes to this day. Joe was already polling badly on the age issue, with roughly 75% of voters saying he was too old to be an effective president. Then he started taking on water for his perceived blank check to Benjamin Netanyahu in Gaza. Now here, she's accurate. Perceived blank check. She says, in other words, Joe Biden didn't really write a blank check to Netanyahu in Gaza. And that's true, he didn't. He placed all kinds of limitations on Mr. Netanyahu and how he would conduct policy. In the aftermath of the October 7th massacre, the job of an ally was to stand behind Netanyahu and say, hey, we got your back, whatever you need, whatever you do. Joe Biden did not do that. But what does she say about perceived? So among the anti-Semitic left, the Jew-hating, Israel-hating left, which is a larger and larger force in the Democratic Party, President Biden was mischaracterized as giving a blank check to Netanyahu. In other words, by attempting to run a Lyndon Johnson type policy, don't do this, don't do that, stay somewhere in the middle. What was it some other Texas politician once said? What's in the middle of the road? The white line of dead armadillos. Well, by attempting to thus placate the left and at the same time stand by his commitments to Netanyahu, Biden succeeded in doing neither, and in irritating both sides. Now, today we have a president who, I don't know if I'd call it a blank check, but he sure as hell is solid with Netanyahu. It makes it absolutely clear that the United States marches step by step with Israel. And in so doing, he has reaped support from supporters of Israel. And of course, the pro-Hamas people still hate him. Fine. Bring it on. Most Americans, we still have not arrived yet at a situation here in America where a majority of our country supports terrorists. The fact that Hamas has as much support as it does in this country is one of the things that alarms me most in modern American politics. When polls emerged that I was getting more popular, writes Kamala, people around him didn't like the contrast that was emerging. Their thinking was zero-sum. Their thinking was zero-sum, she says. If she's shining, he's dimmed. None of them grasped that if I did well, he did well. That gave the concerns about his age, my visible success as his vice president, that, given the concerns about his age, my visible success as his vice president was vital. It would serve as a testament to his judgment in choosing me and reassurance that if something happened, the country was in good hands. My success was important for him. His team didn't get it. That's where the excerpt ends, with a blunt accusation of Biden White House cluelessness compounding the recklessness that Biden himself showed in delaying his withdrawal from the campaign so late in the day. This is the most quoted one of these excerpts. It's Jill and Joe's decision. We all said that, like a mantra, as if we'd all been hypnotized. Was it grace or was it recklessness? In retrospect, I think it was recklessness. The stakes were simply too high. This wasn't a choice that should have been left to an individual's ego, an individual's ambition. It should never have been more than a personal decision. It should have been more than a personal decision. And of course, eventually, that's what it became. Joe Biden, to this day, believes that he should be president. He has said that if he had been allowed to remain in the White House, he would have won the election. Once again, I'm looking at people who believe their own nonsense. Well, Joe Biden at least has, I guess you'd call it an excuse. The man is in dementia. He's not thinking clearly. He finally beat Medicare. And if he actually believes that he could have won the last election, well, that's just one more symptom so far as I'm concerned. But is he sincere? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So what Kamala Harris is talking about here, it should have been more than a personal decision. What she means, I guess, well, there are a couple of... First of all, maybe she's saying there should have been Democratic primaries. Bobby Kennedy Jr. should have been permitted by the Democratic Party to have his name appear on ballots, to campaign, to challenge the president. Of course, that never happened. As a result, Bobby Kennedy is now inflicting himself on us as Secretary of HHS. And there was no Democratic nominating process. It was simply a coronation of King Joe. But King Joe, the emperor, had no clothes, and finally, one fine day in July, he was forced to stand up on a stage next to Donald Trump, and he was naked. He could not articulate a coherent sentence. He was a walking disaster. And at that, it was another month. Another full month before he finally succumbed to reality. Well, again, he had to get the visit. The three grand old men of the Republican Party, of the Democratic Party rather, Barack Obama, a former president, Nancy Pelosi, a very powerful Speaker of the House of Representatives, and Chuck Schumer, the Senate Democratic leader, majority leader, I think, at that time. So the three of them go to Joe Biden and say, no, you're not running. Stop it. It reminded me very much of the time when three senior Republicans, the House and Senate leader, Hugh Scott, and John Rhodes, and the grand old man, Barry Goldwater, all went to call on Richard Nixon and tell him, I'm sorry, we're sorry, you have no support in the Congress, you are going to be impeached and you will be convicted. And the next day, Mr. Nixon resigned. But up to that point, he was ready to tough it out. So perhaps what Kamala Harris is calling for, she thinks that, this visit from the big three should have occurred earlier. Well, obviously that bears on the big question. The title of her book is 107 Days. If Biden had been forced out of the race a month earlier, she'd have had another 30 days. That's a considerable percent. That's 30% more days, more time. Would that have made a difference? I can't see how. It wouldn't have changed who Kamala Harris was or her ability to get votes, which I think was pretty thoroughly demonstrated. Not very good. The one thing about Kamala Harris that perennially amazes me was that she got 48%. That is a testimony to the political weakness of Donald Trump. A Republican more like Charlie Kirk, we talked about this earlier in the program, a Republican more like Charlie Kirk would have beaten her by 10 points. And without changing his policies or, just by being more attractive to voters, more accommodating to voters, more of an outreach kind of guy. Well, fortunately, Ms. Harris did manage to talk herself out of the presidency. And again, I make the point that the single biggest thing Joe Biden could have done to promote her candidacy, and it would have been an entirely understandable, indeed, I think, rational and reasonable thing to do, resign the office. But he was never going to do that. When Pelosi, Obama, and Schumer went to see him, I wonder if that topic came up. It must have. I mean, these people, these are capable, competent people. They're the big boys in the room. Of course the question of resignation came up. And that was where Joe Biden drew the line in the sand. He said, all right, I'll bow out as a candidate, but under no circumstances will you take the presidency from me. I may be drooling on the table, but by God, I will retain this prize, this power, this title for the very last, up to the very last second that I'm entitled to it. Now, we only have a few excerpts here of Kamala Harris' book. But frankly, it looks to me as if this question, whether Biden should have resigned, I don't think she's going to talk about it. She's throwing him under the bus and his staff under the bus in a lot of other ways. But I don't think she's going to come up with saying, the one thing he could have done that might have given me the additional boost I needed to get over the finish line was to resign the office and let me become president for those 107 days. There's a big difference to campaigning for president as an aspiring vice president or as an incumbent president. That's absolutely true. But there are plenty of things that Ms. Harris has put in her book here that aren't true, but that didn't keep her from including them. So let's turn that coin over. Just because something is true doesn't necessarily mean she's going to say it. To be very clear, we don't know yet whether the bulk of the book devoted to her campaign continues this narrative of Team Biden sabotage, or simply treats it as a handicap as she began the uphill climb toward November. In a recent interview with Stephen Colbert, she disclaimed any intention of piling on to criticism of the 46th president. But even if you take her word as gospel about her treatment by the president's inner circle, it doesn't offer much of a rationale for why she lost to Donald Trump. Yes, some of the attack lines his campaign pursued against her with Elon Musk's money. Notice that the author of this is, definitely anti-Trump, and so he throws that in there. Mr. Trump's attack lines would have been pursued whether or not he was spending Elon Musk's money. That's point one. And point two, Musk schmusk. Most of the money in this campaign was behind Kamala Harris. Did Musk contribute a lot? Yes, he did. Millions upon millions of dollars. Did that mean Donald Trump had the bigger war chest? No, not even close. Kamala Harris raised and spent between $1.5 and $2 billion. Remember, a billion is 1,000 million. So this gratuitous little, this is one of the ways that you tell, who am I reading here? What's his idea? Well, when he puts in this little snot-nosed comment about the attack Trump's campaign pursued against her with Elon Musk's money, that tells you loud and clear who this guy's rooting for. You don't need to live in mystery or wonderment. It's right there in black and white in front of you. So, reflected narratives begun or strengthened during her vice presidential tenure. Others very clearly went back to positions she took and things she said during her 2020 presidential campaign, which for the most part she never bothered to contradict or contextualize. Biden and his staff had nothing to do with the disastrous 2019 interview she did, where she appeared to enthusiastically endorse free gender transition surgery for imprisoned criminals who were also illegal immigrants. A huge combo plotter of MAGA bait that led to an incredible number of attack ads in 2024 and helped obliterate her own message. Again, MAGA bait like hell. Overwhelming majorities of Americans do not endorse free gender transmissions surgery for imprisoned criminals who are illegal aliens. I mean, it's kind of a trifecta, I'll admit. But you don't have to be a wild-eyed Trump supporter to say, no, that's not a good idea. No, I don't support that. And I don't want to vote for somebody who does. Once again, the author of the piece, who is, let's get a name here. It's from the Intelligencer. Ed Kilgore is the author of this. Ed Kilgore is a typical mainstream media liberal Democrat kind of guy. And he tips his hand time after time. More generally, it was the overall Biden administration record on inflation and immigration that sank the Harris-Walz ticket, according to most informed analysis, not insufficient Veep prestige within the administration. If she was treated as poorly as she now claims, perhaps she should have talked about it publicly as a way to distance herself from an unpopular president. Now it all sounds like sour grapes, but she has every right to tell her side of the sad story. Well, obviously, the rest of the book still hasn't come out, and Kilgore asks a good question here when he says, I don't know yet whether the bulk of the book continues to be about Team Biden sabotage, or this is simply treated as setting the stage for her 107 poor me, poor handicapped me days. And if you looked at the media polls, the push polls, her announcement and her anointment as candidate for president, led to a tremendous surge in popularity. She was ahead of Donald Trump. She was on her way to win. Rasmussen report was much more level-headed, and that's the one I kept my eye on all the time. They did show that bounce. The bounce was real. The question is, how high was the bounce? And that's a very serious question. Was she ever ahead of Donald Trump during that period? Yeah. According to Rasmussen, she was, for a matter of a few days. And then things settled back to a narrow Trump lead, much as Mr. Trump had a narrow lead over Biden up to the debate. You remember how that polling went? Trump was actually leading Biden, not by much. It was, pretty much neck and neck. Then came the debate. And Biden's support dropped by, really you'd think that a debate performance like that, people would just walk away. But oh no. His numbers dropped by 3-4 points. And everybody pointed the polls and said, look, Trump's lead over Biden has widened. It widened by about 3 or 4 points because Trump's numbers never went up. People who walked away from Biden didn't cross over to support Trump. They simply decided, well, I can't vote for that, so I'm going to be undecided or whatever. Trump never picked up any of that. Then Kamala Harris comes in, and there's all this media attention on her and everything, gives her a momentary bounce. But presently, that falls away, and she winds up just about where Biden had been before his disastrous debate performance. Neck and neck with Trump. If you looked at the mainstream media polls, she was ahead. If you looked at Rasmussen, she was generally about 2 points behind throughout the entire campaign. And guess what? On election night, when the votes were counted, she wound up 2 points behind. This is one of the reasons why I look at Rasmussen as the gold standard of reporting, because not only did they have it right at the end, I'm convinced they had it right all the way through. The rationale they gave, the methodology that they revealed, it all inspires tremendous confidence. So if you're looking for, incidentally, Rasmussen's latest number on Trump's presidential approval, 48%. Not a majority, but a few points higher than the average of the other polls. So again, true to form, but 48 is actually a pretty good number for Mr. Trump at this point. I hope it goes higher before the next midterm. Okay, we are out of time. Thank you very much for being with us today. I appreciate your listening. The Charles Freedman radio program comes to you every weekday on SantaCruzVoice.com. We have News Talk here from 9 to noon every weekday, and that's enough for today. I will see you once again on Monday at 9:06. See you at the fair on Saturday between 2 and 4. Okay. Whoa. Yeah. Boom. 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 Yeah, he never... $200.